At 7,800 meters below sea level, we found a structure that was absorbing sound instead of reflecting it. When we lowered hydrophones into it, something began counting down. The date it reached zero has already passed. My name is Dr. Cara Voss. I was the lead surveyor on the RV Lanternfish during the 2019 deep-sea mapping expedition of the Kermadec Trench system, approximately 340 nautical miles southwest of the Kermadec Islands. I was a marine geologist for 14 years. My job was to look at the ocean floor and describe, precisely and factually, what was there. Not what it resembled, not what it suggested, not what it made me feel in the chest at 2 in the morning. What it was, dimensionally and materially and factually. I want you to hold that, because when I tell you what we found, you're going to want to decide early that I'm the kind of person who imagines things. I need you to understand, I am constitutionally the opposite of that person. I spent 14 years being the person in the room who slows everything down, who asks for the second data set, who refuses to write the conclusion until the evidence is unambiguous. I'm telling you this because I need you to trust me when I tell you that the evidence became unambiguous. I used to use the word ancient in my field reports. It appears approximately 400 times across 14 years of documentation. As of 3 years ago, I stopped. Not because the word is imprecise. It is quite precise as words go. I stopped because I now understand it isn't large enough for what I'm pointing at. It's like calling the sun warm, technically defensible, completely insufficient. Whatever I'm about to describe will be smaller than what it actually was. The limitation isn't my memory. The limitation is language. Language was built by things that live on the surface. What I found does not. What I thought I knew. Let me tell you what I understood about the deep ocean before this expedition. Not the textbook version. The version you carry in your body after 14 years of working at it. The ocean covers about 71% of Earth's surface. Most people know this. What most people don't know is that the ocean has more volume below 1,000 meters than above it. The sunlit surface layer, where the fish are, the whales, the coral, that's the footnote. The midnight zone, the abyssal zone, the hadal zone, that is the ocean. The rest is the border. We have mapped less than 25% of the seafloor in meaningful resolution. That number gets quoted, and then people move on. What they don't sit with is the implication. We have better maps of the surface of Mars than of our own ocean floor. We know more about the topography of a planet we cannot survive on than the one we live on. I want you to sit with that. Not the statistic, the meaning of it. Every other unexplored environment on this planet is one we could, in principle, walk into tomorrow. We have the biology for it. Oxygen exists. Temperature is within tolerance. The deep ocean is the only environment on Earth that is constitutionally hostile to us. Not dangerous, hostile. It was not built for us and cannot be adapted to accommodate us without technological mediation so complete that what we send down there is not really us at all. It's a machine with a human-shaped cavity inside it. This matters because it means the deep ocean has had a kind of privacy that no other environment on Earth has had. For the entire history of our species, and long before our species existed, before primates, before mammals were dominant, the hadal zone has been a place where nothing from the surface could go. A place outside the reach of anything that breathes air or needs light. A place where something could develop, over a very long time, without interruption. The floor of the Kermadec Trench where we were working is basalt. Formed at a mid-ocean ridge, carried by plate tectonics towards subduction for somewhere between 80 and 120 million years. 80 million years ago, there were no humans, no primates. The dominant vertebrates were large reptiles whose entire lineage would be extinguished by an asteroid impact 15 million years later. The basalt at the bottom of the Kermadec Trench has been sitting in the dark at 700 atmospheres of pressure for longer than mammals have been the dominant vertebrate on this planet. I want you to hold that number, not as a fact, as a duration, as a span of time that has no human frame of reference. We expect that floor to be inert, geological, a record of time, not an agent of it, a surface that has done nothing in 80 million years except collect the ocean's dead and wait for subduction. It is passive. It is the background. What I found suggested that assumption was wrong. I believed all of this the way people believe gravity exists, until the data told me gravity wasn't the rule anymore. Not metaphorically wrong, not wrong in a way that requires reinterpretation of ambiguous data, wrong in a way that is measurable, documented, and archived in a public repository that I will link in the description. The shadow problem. We used sonar to map. Acoustic pulses sent downward, bouncing off the seafloor, returning with timing data we convert to depth. Well understood technology. The workhorse of deep-sea mapping for 50 years. There's a limitation researchers call the shadow problem. When a sonar pulse hits an object, a ridge, a seamount, a formation, it returns. But if that object is large enough or shaped a specific way, the pulse creates a shadow zone behind it, a region the pulse never reaches. The shadow registers as absence of data, a gap, normal, unremarkable. Shadow zones have predictable shapes. They follow the geometry of what casts them. Look at the shadow, and you infer the object. Same logic as a shadow on a wall. On day 8, we found a shadow zone with the wrong shape. It was at approximately 7,400 meters depth along the eastern wall of the trench. The formation casting it was a ridge, linear, oriented north-south, about 300 meters in length. The shadow it cast was circular, roughly 800 meters in diameter. That is not how geometry works. I noted it. I logged it. I said to my colleague Dr. Patrick Hearn, who was on acoustic monitoring that shift, "This shadow return is malformed. Flag it for resurvey." Patrick flagged it. We moved on. I filed it under Equipment Calibration Anomaly Suspected. Recommend resurvey. That was my language, my frame. Calibration anomaly. In 14 years, I had filed approximately 60 anomaly reports. 58 resolved on resurvey as equipment drift or signal interference. 1 resolved as a previously unmapped seamount. I expected this to resolve the same way. I didn't think about it again until day 11. Day 11. We ran the second pass of that section. Standard procedure. Any flagged anomaly gets a second traverse at the same depth, from a different approach angle. The shadow was still circular, and it was larger. The ridge was unchanged. Same dimensions, same orientation, same acoustic signature. The shadow was approximately 12% larger in diameter than the day 8 measurement. I didn't say anything. I ran the calibration check first. I ran it twice. The instrument was reading correctly within expected tolerance. Then I switched sonar frequencies. Our system operated at 12 kHz for deep floor mapping. I switched to 30 kHz, recalculated the shadow geometry. Same shape, same diameter. Patrick came over. He stood behind me and looked at the monitor for a moment without saying anything. Then, "You've run calibration?" "Twice," I said. "And you switched frequencies?" "Just did." He pulled up a chair. In 14 years, I had never seen Patrick pull up a chair to look at sonar data. He was the kind of person who processed data standing up, at a slight angle, like he was prepared to move as soon as the information told him where to go. Sitting down meant he didn't know where to go yet. Could be ship movement, he said. If the lanternfish repositioned between the first traverse and the second, the geometry would shift. I pulled the ship's position logs for both survey passes. The vessel had maintained position within a 40-meter radius, well within tolerance for consistent acoustic returns at this range. Not ship movement, I said. He nodded slowly. Thermocline? Cold water mass drifting in from the south? I had thought of this already. Thermal layers at depth can create anomalous acoustic returns. I'd run the water temperature profile, essentially uniform temperature from 4,000 meters down to survey depth. No thermocline, no cold water intrusion. Not thermal, I said. Patrick leaned forward and clicked through the raw return data, looking for the kind of noise pattern that indicates equipment malfunction rather than genuine signal. He spent a long time on it. There's no spike, he said finally. The return is clean. It's not instrument noise. I know, I said. Then what is it? I sat with that question for a long time before I answered. Not because I didn't have a hypothesis. I had one, fully formed, and it was insane. But saying it out loud, to a colleague I'd worked with for 7 years, as a serious scientific proposal, that was a different order of commitment than thinking it alone at a monitor at 2 a.m. I don't know, I said. It was the most accurate thing I could say. I knew what the data showed. I didn't know what the data meant. Those are different kinds of knowing, and confusing them is how careers end. I filed the anomaly again. Shadow diameter inconsistent with identified formation. Source unclear. Recommend visual inspection when dive window allows. Then I went to my bunk and lay there for 3 hours without sleeping, thinking about a shadow that had grown 12% in 3 days, while the object casting it stayed exactly the same size. A shadow does not grow unless the object casting it changes. The object had not changed. Declan. On day 13, Declan Marsh came to find me. It was 11 at night. I was in the galley, eating something reheated from dinner, not tasting it, running numbers in my head. He set his laptop on the table in front of me without saying anything, and waited. I looked at the screen. A SoNAR return from the previous night. A section of trench wall at approximately 7,800 meters depth, 1.2 kilometers south of the shadow anomaly. A shelf formation. Horizontal, extending outward from the wall. At first glance, normal. Then I looked more carefully. The surface was smooth. Not smooth like well-worn rock, not smooth like sediment. Smooth in a way that, once you've cataloged a few thousand square kilometers of deep-sea sonar data, registers in the gut before the mind has finished processing. This is wrong. What do you think that is? Declan asked. His voice was trying very hard to sound casual and not quite making it. Show me the full survey path for that section, I said. He pulled it up. The shelf extended further west than our traverse had covered. We didn't know the full extent. And the shelf was casting a shadow. Circular. Approximately the same diameter as the one we'd logged on day 8, 1.2 kilometers south. I put my fork down. I looked at Declan. He was 23, doing his best to look like a scientist and not like someone who had been awake for most of the previous 2 days, running analysis on a data set he wasn't sure how to interpret. Tell me your thinking, I said. He sat down across from me. The shadow anomaly from day 8 and this shelf formation are producing the same acoustic signature, he said. Same circular return, same approximate diameter, logged 3 days apart, 1.2 kilometers apart. The simplest explanation is that they're from the same source. The simplest explanation, I said. I know how it sounds. Tell me anyway. He folded his hands on the table. If they're from the same source, he said carefully, then the source moved. From the day 8 location to the shelf location in 3 days. I looked at the sonar return on his laptop, the smooth shelf, the circular shadow below it. I thought about the 12% growth in the day 8 anomaly. I thought about what it would mean for a shadow-producing object to move 1.2 kilometers at hadal depth over 3 days. That's not a geological formation, I said. No, he said. It's not any known biological organism either. No, he said again, quieter. We looked at each other across the galley table. The lanternfish settled into a swell, and the hull made its low groaning sound. And somewhere below us, the deep ocean was doing whatever it had been doing for 80 million years before anyone thought to go and look. What are we supposed to do with this? He asked. It was a genuine question. He was 23 and had gone into marine geology because he believed in the systematic accumulation of knowledge about the world, and the world was currently failing to cooperate. We log it, I said, carefully. We flag both anomalies. We say nothing to the other students until we have more data. And on day 14, I'm requesting a dive window. He nodded, closed his laptop, stood up. At the door, he paused. Dr. Voss. Yes. Do you think we're the first people who've found this? I didn't answer him. I told him to get some sleep. He left. I sat in the galley for another hour, alone with the question. What lives there? I need to tell you why I loved the deep ocean before I tell you what it did to that love. My first hadal dive was in 2008, off the Japanese coast, during a collaborative survey with the Jamstek Research Institute. I was 31. I had spent most of the previous 3 years at a desk or on ships at the surface, seeing the deep ocean as information rather than place. The descent took 4 hours. I spent most of them trying not to think about how much water was above me. At 1,000 meters, the bioluminescence started. Organisms I couldn't identify, producing brief pulses of cold blue-green light as we displaced water past them. I pressed my face against the glass like a child, which is not a thing a 31-year-old scientist is supposed to do. The person running the camera equipment was looking at his instruments and didn't see. When we reached the floor, 6,200 meters, I saw amphipods for the first time in person rather than in photographs. They were smaller than I expected, translucent, moving through the pale sediment in slow, purposeful arcs, each one a few centimeters long, living at the bottom of a world that my biology had no framework for. The researcher next to me said something in Japanese. When I asked him to translate, he thought for a moment and said something like, "They found a way." I have thought about that phrase for 16 years. They found a way. Not survived, which implies struggle, triumph of persistence over adversity. Found a way is different. Found a way suggests that the hadal zone was not a hostile environment that life conquered. It was a place that life discovered was possible. A different kind of world that organisms learned to enter on its own terms. That was the frame I brought to the Lanternfish expedition. The hadal zone as a place life had found a way into. As something vast and old and genuinely alien to everything my body was built for, but comprehensible. Comprehensible in the way that any extreme environment becomes comprehensible once you have the data. I don't look at it the same way anymore. Not because it's worse, because it's larger. Because I now know that when I was at 6,200 meters in 2008, pressing my face against the porthole glass watching amphipods, I was understanding approximately the same percentage of what was actually there as a person standing at the shoreline understands about the ocean. The surface. Just the surface. Something else is down there. Something that has been down there since before the asteroid that ended the Cretaceous. Since before the emergence of mammals. Since before anything that eventually became us took its first uncertain steps in a direction that would lead, 65 million years later, to a woman in a metal sphere descending toward a floor it had been watching. If watching is the right word, for a very long time. On day 14, I requested the dive. The shadow moved.